If the Fed does step in and start buying bonds in that way, does the US just turn into Japan?
No, we turned into Argentina. Um, yeah, Japan is night and day different than the United States in this situation, right? So Japan is a net international investment position. Remember, so I said we have foreigners own 65%, that 18 trillion, 65% of US GDP. So the US net international investment position is negative 65% of US GDP. Japan's is positive 60%. So for starters, when Japan runs into that problem, the first thing they can do is ring, ring, ring. Hey, Washington, it's Japan. Those dollar assets we have to the tune of 60% of our GDP, we want to start selling 5% a year because we need to finance our fiscal deficit of 3% a year and do 2% of stimulus. And they can do that for a long, long time. That's number one. Number two, they run a current account surplus, right? They're trade surplus. So they are running surpluses on the current account versus us running deficits. We need, number three, okay, the deficits we're running, the twin deficits, historically have been foreign financed. They have financed internally. So you can run, if you're financing internally as Japan, deflation is an option when you're financing internally, right? Because now you can pay your people 0% interest on long-term bonds because the cost of living is, you're in deflation. Your cost of living is falling. Living standards are rising. Politically, that works. You cannot do that when you're the United States. If you're financing externally, you start running deflation as a twin deficit. You get into a debt spiral. Your debt pile gets bigger and bigger and bigger non-linearly every year, and pretty soon you run into debt credibility issues. You also, as Japan, do not have to provide most of your defense because your friends, the United States, have provided it for most of the last 80 years. We have to provide our own defense, and that defense appears to be getting much more expensive by the minute. And then lastly, the United States is very heterogeneous in population, and Japan is very homogeneous in population. So it's a lot easier to sort of get people to sort of, go along to get along and take one for the team. Culturally, there's much more of a willingness to take one for the team. I think their government has probably all in all done probably a better job of maintaining their credibility, or maybe losing their credibility less fast than ours has with its domestic populace, maybe a better way of putting it. And so when you roll those things together, but especially the net international investment position, the current account, Japan can say, ring, ring, Washington, send us our money. We need it to finance ourselves. And that throws that, sell treasuries. We're going to bring back the dollars and defend the yen with those by selling dollars and buying yen. And they can do that for a while. They have 60% of GDP net internet. There is no ring ring for the US. The ring ring, they don't call anybody overseas. The ring ring is, hey, Fed, start printing again. And when you say when they have to do that again, whenever that is, because they're going to have to do that again, then that's why it gets much more into an Argentina-like dynamic. And as I've said, Argentina with U.S. characteristics, not Japan, is what is going to be the outcome.
I was out in Argentina recently. What was it, 3-4 months ago, Danny? And I made a documentary while I was there about inflation. And one of the interesting things about being in Argentina is if you're certainly in the middle class, you have access to dollar products, whether it's cash dollars or digital dollars or crypto dollars or US equities or US bonds. You have access to dollars to mitigate against inflation. And most people just get rid of their peso and get some kind of dollar products as soon as possible. But if you're an American, there is no equivalent. I mean, yes, there's gold and yes, there's Bitcoin. And, we've seen this rise in both gold and Bitcoin recently. And perhaps that's it. I mean, is that it?
The short answer is yes. You can kind of see, right, who has won over the last 10, 20 years in the US, right? It's if you own a lot of stocks, you're doing great. If you own Bitcoin, you're doing great, obviously. If you're not an asset owner in America, you've gotten crushed. So you can already see it if you just take a step back and see it for what it is. the dynamics are already there. Washington and Wall Street have done great. It's sort of the classic Cantillon effect, right? The people who touch the money first have been fine, and the people that can buy assets with it are fine. Now we're starting to see it sort of spread out, where all of a sudden, Ford, GM, the balance of power seems to maybe be shifting a bit in terms of labor, and we'll see if that continues a wage spiral or sticky inflation, what have you. But that's why I say Argentina with U.S. characteristics. It's not going to purely be, but Argentina, but it's not going to be 20 lost years of like 0% inflation. It's going to be 4% up to 12%, 12% down to 6% up to 14. Like that's what's coming in my view in the U.S.
Well, again, just referring back to my trip to Argentina, one of the things that really stood out to me is that I try to spend time in different communities. And as I said, some people have access to dollars or ways to mitigate what's happening. But the poorest people in Argentina didn't have that. They don't have access to dollars. They're actually limited on the dollars they can get by the government. If they try to get too many, then they lose their handouts. And specifically, one conversation stood out to me. There's one guy who was saying, look, truth is, this high inflation is really good for me because I have access to dollars and everything's getting cheaper that I want to buy. He explained how he can buy property now essentially cheaper just by hoarding dollars. And so it's this weird thing where it's kind of the Cantillon effect, but it isn't directly because, well, I guess it is, but it feels like it's a really punishing experience to go through if you're the poorest in society. And what I worry about, or what I consider, is this why we're seeing this kind of rise in social unrest, rise in homelessness, rising, we're seeing the videos of people, of the rising shoplifting. We're seeing, we've just seen a lot of things, Luke. And do you think this is it? This is the early signs of social unrest that's coming with this?
I think on some level, I think you can clearly see, what's the name of the wealth inequality index? I forget the name of it. But it's gotten pretty extreme in the U.S. Over the last 20, 30, 40 years. Globalism has hollowed out the middle and working classes. You've got life expectancies in the United States falling. You've had since 2010, nearly 1 million people have died of drug overdoses in America, which is, if I'm not mistaken, more than we've lost in all the wars, at least back to the Civil War. Case and Deaton called that attributed those to drugs or to deaths of economic hopelessness. Right? Is there's more than just a job. There's a meaning to a job in middle class, and these are the same types of dynamics that you saw in the Soviet Union when the Soviet Union collapsed, and sort of their bureaucrats and apparatchiks that sort of had meaning, and their lives were given meaning by their work, which was assigned or given by the Soviet the Soviet political party. Then that went away, and they sort of didn't know what else to do. You saw this in Native Americans and the Plains Native Americans in the late 1800s, where sort of their way of life went away, their meaning went away, and you had epidemics of suicide, alcoholism, etc. So you're seeing some of those same. Again, it's not apples to apple, or it's not a direct compare, but in a directional standpoint, you're seeing these types of things. Do I think it is tied to the way the economic system has been allowed to evolve over the last 30 years? Absolutely, I do. Absolutely, I do. The unrest, the shoplifting, some of that is there's social aspects relative to, but it's I think a lot of what we're seeing in terms of the wealth inequality can be tied back to how the economic system has been allowed to evolve, where there is a huge Cantillon effect that has benefited Washington and Wall Street, and to the detriment of the middle class, the working class, and really much of America.